Beneath the quiet subdivisions of central Florida, beneath the cul-de-sacs and the swimming pools and the manicured lawns, geologists have found something that the people living there mostly do not know about, and that no amount of money or engineering can truly repair. The ground is hollow. Not everywhere, not all at once, but riddled through with cavities, voids, and slowly dissolving rock, so that a great many of the homes in this part of the state are sitting on a foundation that is, quite literally, disappearing beneath them. And here is the part that separates this from an ordinary hazard. You cannot fix it. You can patch a single hole at enormous cost for a while. But you cannot repair the thing that is actually wrong, because the thing that is actually wrong is the entire bedrock the state is built on. Most people imagine that the ground beneath their house is solid, permanent, the one thing in the world you can count on to stay put. In much of Florida, that is an illusion. The rock down there is not solid at all. It is riddled with holes like a sponge, being eaten away from within by the very water that Florida depends on to drink, and the loose sand and clay on top of it is held up over those holes by nothing more than friction and luck. When that luck runs out, the ground does not crack or sag or give a polite warning. It opens. It swallows whatever is above it, a driveway, a road, a car, a house, a person, straight down into the earth. And then, once it has happened, everyone discovers the thing the geologists already knew. There is no putting it back. So this is not a story about one dramatic sinkhole. It is a story about a whole state built on a foundation that is dissolving, about the subdivisions that were sold to hundreds of thousands of families on top of it, and about a geological reality that cannot be engineered away, only lived with, and paid for, and feared. Florida did not build on rock, it built on a slowly disappearing sponge, and the geologists have seen exactly what is underneath. Let me start with the night that showed the whole country what this ground can do. It is late on an ordinary evening in a suburb east of Tampa, in a modest, well-kept house on a normal street in a normal neighborhood. A man has gone to bed in his bedroom, the way he has every night. His family is elsewhere in the house, and in the darkness, with no warning at all, no rumble, no crack, the floor of his bedroom simply gives way. The earth beneath the house has opened into a sinkhole, and it swallows the bedroom whole, the bed, the furniture, the man, all of it dropping straight down into a pit that has opened in the limestone below. His brother hears him cry out and rushes in to find the room gone, a hole where the floor used to be, and tries desperately to dig, but the ground keeps collapsing and there is nothing to be done. The man is never recovered. The sinkhole is so unstable that rescuers cannot safely enter it. And eventually the house itself is demolished, the hole filled, the site fenced off, because there is no way to make it safe and no way to bring him back. A man went to sleep in his own bed, in his own house, in a quiet Florida neighborhood, and the ground opened underneath him and took him, and it could not be undone. And do not imagine these are always small holes that take a single room. They can swallow a piece of a city. Back in the early 1980s, in the town of Winter Park near Orlando, the ground opened into one of the most famous sinkholes in American history, and it did not stop at a bedroom. Over the course of a day and more, it grew into a crater hundreds of feet across and more than 100 feet deep, and it ate everything above it. It took a house. It took a chunk of a car dealership, swallowing several vehicles. It took a public swimming pool, the water and all. It took parts of the streets around it, sidewalks, sewer lines, whatever was over the void when it collapsed. People stood at the edge and watched their town drop into the earth in real time, powerless to stop it, as the hole widened toward them foot by foot. That sinkhole eventually stabilized and was turned into an artificial lake. because there was nothing else to be done with a hole that size, and today, people drive past it with no idea that a neighborhood once fell into it. That is the scale this ground is capable of. Not just a person in a bed, but a house, a business, a pool, and a stretch of city gone into a hole that opened in a single afternoon, in a place that looked as ordinary as anywhere else in Florida. That is the extreme version, the one that makes the news. But it is not a freak accident. It is the loudest possible expression of a condition that is present, quietly, beneath a huge swath of the state. To understand it, you have to understand what geologists actually see when they look beneath these neighborhoods. Florida is built on limestone, a soft rock made largely from the compressed remains of ancient sea life, laid down when the whole peninsula was under a shallow ocean. And limestone has a fatal weakness. It dissolves in acid. Not strong acid, just the mild, natural acidity of rainwater and groundwater, which becomes slightly acidic as it picks up carbon dioxide from the air and the soil. Over millions of years, that faintly acidic water has trickled down through the Florida limestone and slowly eaten it away, dissolving out an underground labyrinth of cracks, channels, cavities, and caverns. Geologists call this kind of landscape karst, and Florida is one of the most karst-riddled places in the country. When they map beneath the subdivisions with ground-penetrating radar and drilling, what they find is not solid rock. It is a honeycomb, a bedrock full of voids and soft spots and dissolved-out pockets, with the sand and clay above it slowly raveling, trickling down into the holes below like sand through the neck of an hourglass. They can see the sinkholes forming before they ever reach the surface, cavities growing in the dark, the cover above them thinning. The hole that swallowed that man's bedroom did not appear that night. It had been forming beneath the neighborhood for a very long time, and the geologists know that for every one that breaks through, many more are down there, still growing, still hidden. And you might think that if geologists can see these voids, they can simply find them all and keep everyone safe. But detection is far harder and far less certain than that, and it is worth understanding why. To look beneath a property, geologists use tools like ground-penetrating radar, which sends signals into the earth and reads what bounces back, and electrical resistivity surveys that map how easily current passes through the ground, along with old-fashioned test borings that drill down to see what is actually there. These methods can reveal soft spots, cavities, and the raveling of sand into voids below. But they are expensive. They only cover the small patch of ground you actually survey, and they give a snapshot of a situation that is constantly changing. A survey that comes back clean today does not guarantee the ground will be sound in 5 years, because the water table can drop, a new cavity can ravel open, and the conditions can shift. Most homes are never surveyed at all because no one pays for it until there is already a problem. So the detection tools do not actually prevent the disaster. At best, they document the risk after suspicion has already arisen, or map a known trouble spot. They are a flashlight in a very large, very dark basement, able to show you one corner at a time, while the thing you are afraid of extends far beyond the beam, under the whole house, under the whole street, under the whole county. Most of it never looked at, all of it slowly changing. Now, why can this not be fixed? Why is this different from any other ground problem that engineers deal with every day? Because the problem is not a hole. A hole you can fill. The problem is the rock itself and its fundamental nature, and that cannot be changed. When a sinkhole opens, engineers can and do repair that specific spot, often by pumping enormous amounts of grout, a cement-like slurry, down into the ground to fill the void and stabilize the area. It is expensive, sometimes costing more than the house is worth, and it can work for that one location. But it does nothing about the thousands of other cavities in the same bedrock, and it does nothing to stop the process that made them. because that process is the slow dissolving of the entire limestone foundation of the state by the water moving through it, and that has been going on for millions of years and will not stop. You cannot grout an entire county. You cannot undissolve the rock. You cannot relocate a subdivision of 10,000 homes off the karst because the karst is everywhere beneath them, and the next lot over is no more solid than the last. Patching a sinkhole is like bailing water from a boat with a hole in the hull. You can keep one spot dry for a while, but the sea is still coming in, everywhere, all the time. The geologists can find the voids. They can even predict in a general way where the risk is highest. What they cannot do, what no one can do, is make the ground solid, because the ground was never solid to begin with, and there is no engineering that turns a sponge into a stone. And even the grouting, the one repair that does work on a single spot, comes with a bitter catch. Pumping grout into the ground fills the void you know about, but the ground beneath a house is not one clean cavity. It is a whole system of connected spaces and soft zones, and stabilizing one area can simply shift the stress to another, so that a home repaired at great cost can develop new sinkhole activity nearby months or years later. Some houses are grouted more than once, the owners pouring good money after bad into a ground that keeps opening around the patches. And a repaired sinkhole, even a properly stabilized one, follows the property forever, a permanent mark on its history that suppresses its value, no matter how sound the fix. So the repair does not restore the home to what it was, either physically or financially. It buys a fragile, expensive, disclosed truce with a piece of ground that has already shown it will not stay still. The only true fix would be solid rock, and that is the one thing the money can never buy. And here is what makes the modern version of this so much more dangerous than the slow natural process alone. Human beings are accelerating it, mainly by doing one thing: pumping water out of the ground. The same limestone that is full of holes is also Florida's great aquifer, the underground reservoir that supplies the drinking water for most of the state and irrigates its farms. And Florida has been pumping that water out at an enormous and growing rate to supply one of the fastest growing populations in the country and a huge agricultural industry. When that groundwater is high, it fills the cavities in the limestone and actually helps support the ground, the water pressure buoying up the cover above the voids. But when the water table is lowered by heavy pumping, or by drought, that support is removed. The buoyant pressure holding up the roof of a cavity disappears, and the weight of the sand and clay above is suddenly too much, and it collapses into the void. This is why sinkholes so often open during dry periods and in areas of heavy groundwater withdrawal. There is a notorious example from the strawberry farming country east of Tampa, where during a hard freeze, the farmers pumped vast amounts of groundwater to spray their crops and protect them from the cold, dropping the local water table so fast and so far that the ground responded by opening dozens upon dozens of sinkholes across the area in a matter of days, swallowing roads and threatening homes. That is the terrifying lesson. The very act of pulling water out of the ground to survive in Florida, to drink, to farm, to grow, is the act that pulls the support out from under the ground and triggers the collapses. And the more people move to Florida, the more water gets pumped and the more the ground is destabilized, a vicious loop with no easy exit. And this is happening in a very specific and very populated part of the state, which has earned a grim nickname. The region north and east of Tampa Bay, running through counties like Pasco, Hernando, and Hillsborough, is so prone to these collapses that it is widely known as Sinkhole Alley. It is the part of the state where the geology is most treacherous, where the limestone lies close to the surface under a cover thin enough and loose enough to collapse readily, and where the water table has been drawn down hardest by growth and agriculture. And it is precisely there, on some of the most sinkhole-prone ground in America, that Florida's explosive growth has been throwing up subdivision after subdivision, filling the land with homes for the endless stream of new residents. The building has raced ahead onto exactly the ground the geologists would warn you about, because the land is available and the demand is relentless, and a beautiful new house on a quiet street gives no hint of the honeycomb beneath it. So you have a collision, the densest new development meeting the most dissolving ground. Hundreds of thousands of families buying homes on a foundation that a geologist would describe as actively coming apart. The nickname Sinkhole Alley is not folklore. It is a map of where the boom and the bedrock are on a collision course. So why, knowing all of this, do they keep building there? The answer is the same force that drives so much of Florida, relentless growth and the money that rides on it. Florida adds enormous numbers of new residents every year, and all those people need somewhere to live, which means constant, intense pressure to build more houses. The land in the safest areas is largely spoken for, so development pushes out onto the cheaper, more marginal ground, which very often is exactly the sinkhole-prone land that a geologist would flag. Builders are in the business of building, and a lot near a known sinkhole risk is still a lot that can hold a profitable house. Buyers, meanwhile, are often moving from other states, drawn by the sunshine and the prices, with no idea that the ground here behaves differently than the solid earth they grew up on, and no reason to suspect that the beautiful new home in the quiet subdivision sits over a honeycomb. Disclosure rules exist, and Florida does require some sharing of known sinkhole history. But a clean history on paper is not the same as safe ground. It often just means no one has looked, or nothing has broken through yet. So the boom rolls on, house after house, subdivision after subdivision, onto ground that the state's own geologists understand to be among the most treacherous in the country. Because the demand is enormous, the profits are real, and the danger is invisible until the day it is not. The market has every incentive to keep building, and almost none to stop. So what does it actually mean to live on top of this? What happens to the homes and the people? For most people, for most of the time, nothing visible happens, and that is part of what makes it so insidious. The ground holds. The house stands. Life goes on, and the danger is invisible. But the signs, when they come, are the stuff of quiet nightmares. Cracks begin to appear, in the walls, in the floor, in the foundation, spreading and widening. Doors and windows stop closing properly as the house subtly shifts. A depression appears in the yard, a soft spot, a small dip that slowly deepens. The pool starts losing water. Sometimes it stays slow, a house gradually racking itself apart over years as the ground beneath it sags into a developing cavity. And sometimes, as that man in his bedroom learned, it is not slow at all, and the ground simply opens. For the families it happens to, it is a special kind of horror, because the one thing everyone believes is safe, the solid earth under their home, turns out to be the threat, and there is nowhere to run to that is definitely more solid, because the same rock runs under the whole neighborhood. People describe living with a new fear, listening for creaks, watching cracks, wondering if the soft spot in the yard is the beginning of something. It is the loss of the most basic sense of security a person can have, the certainty that the ground will stay where it is. And then comes the second disaster, the one that arrives on paper, because a home on collapsing ground is also a financial trap. A house is, for most families, the largest thing they will ever own, their security, their savings, their retirement. And a sinkhole, or even the suspicion of one, can destroy that value in an instant. Once a property is known to have sinkhole activity, its value can collapse as thoroughly as the ground, because who wants to buy a house that might be swallowed? Repairs, if they are even possible, can cost more than the home is worth. And the insurance, the thing that is supposed to protect people from exactly this kind of catastrophe, has been in crisis over it for years. Sinkhole claims have cost insurers so much that coverage has become expensive, restricted, and in some cases hard to get at all, with companies fighting claims, narrowing what they will pay for, and pulling back from the most dangerous areas. So a family can find themselves trapped in a house they cannot sell, cannot fully insure, and cannot afford to repair. Sitting on ground that everyone now knows is compromised, their entire net worth tied to a property that the market has quietly written off. The physical problem cannot be fixed, and the financial problem that follows it cannot be escaped. Because the same fact that the house sits on dissolving rock poisons both the ground and the paperwork. You are left owning a place that is worth a fortune right up until the moment anyone looks underneath it. To feel what this actually does to a life, imagine an ordinary family who saved for years and finally bought their home in one of these subdivisions, the place where they meant to raise their kids and grow old. One day they notice a crack running up the drywall, and then another, and a door that will not latch anymore. They call someone, and the testing begins, and the word sinkhole enters their lives and never leaves. Engineers drill and survey. The report confirms what they dreaded: there is a developing cavity beneath the home, and the structure is being pulled apart as the ground settles into it. Now they are living inside a slow-motion emergency. Do they stay in a house that could be actively failing beneath them, with their children sleeping in it? Or do they leave and keep paying the mortgage on a home no one will buy? The insurance fight drags on for months, maybe years, the company disputing the cause, the coverage, the cost. The repair estimate, if repair is even possible, is staggering. Their neighbors grow nervous because a confirmed sinkhole next door drops their values too, and the home that was supposed to be the family's security has become the single most frightening thing in their life. A trap they cannot sell their way out of and cannot afford to fix. Sitting on ground that will not stop moving. That story, in one form or another, has played out for families across sinkhole country, and it captures the cruelty of a disaster that attacks the one place people are supposed to feel safest. So where does this go, as Florida keeps growing and the pumping keeps increasing and the rock keeps dissolving? It goes in one direction, because none of the underlying trends are reversing. Florida's population keeps booming, which means more homes, more demand for water, and more pumping, which lowers the water table further and destabilizes more ground. The dissolving of the limestone does not stop because it is driven by the fundamental chemistry of water and rock and cannot be switched off. And the development keeps pushing onto marginal land, because the good land is taken and the demand never ends. So the collision between people and unstable ground does not ease over time. It intensifies. More families end up living over the honeycomb, more of the cover thins as the water table drops, and the number of homes sitting on ground that geologists know to be compromised grows year after year. And the changing climate is quietly loading the dice toward more collapses in a way most people never connect to sinkholes. A warming climate tends to make wet and dry extremes sharper, which is exactly the recipe that opens the ground. Deeper, more intense droughts drive the water table down and push people and farms to pump even harder to compensate, removing the buoyant support from beneath the cavities right when the ground is most vulnerable. Then, when the rain finally returns, it can come in heavier, more sudden downpours, and a sudden rush of water, soaking into thinned, weakened cover, can be the final trigger that ravels it down into a void. So the whip between too dry and too wet, which is becoming more pronounced. Hits the karst from both directions, drought pulling the support out from below, and cloudbursts pushing the collapse from above. Add the rising sea pressing salt water up into the aquifer along the coasts, and the pressures on Florida's dissolving foundation are not easing with time, they are intensifying. There is no grand solution on the horizon, because the thing that would need fixing is the bedrock of an entire state, and that is beyond any human power to repair. The most that can be done is to map the risk, to build a little more carefully where anyone bothers to check, and to keep patching the individual holes as they open, one expensive grout injection at a time, while the larger reality that a great many people are living on a foundation that is quietly disappearing remains exactly as unfixable as it has always been. And the sinkholes, as frightening as they are really just the most dramatic symptom of a deeper truth about the whole state, which is that Florida is fundamentally built on porous, dissolving rock, and that shapes far more than a few unlucky neighborhoods. Because the limestone is riddled with holes and soaks up water like a sponge, Florida cannot defend itself from rising seas the way other places can. A seawall keeps the ocean out only if the ground behind it is solid, but in Florida, the seawater simply flows underneath the wall, up through the porous rock, seeping into the aquifer and bubbling up through the ground far inland. That same permeability that makes the sinkholes is why salt water is creeping into the drinking water supplies of coastal Florida. Why some communities already see the sea come up through storm drains on sunny days, and why the peninsula is one of the most exposed places in the country to a rising ocean. The dissolving foundation is not a separate problem from the sinkholes. It is the same foundation. Florida is a low, flat slab of holy limestone sitting between a rising sea and a growing population drinking the water out of the holes, and the sinkholes swallowing the subdivisions are simply the most visible place where the fragility of that foundation breaks through to the surface. The whole state rests on ground that leaks, dissolves, and shifts, and no wall, no pump, and no amount of concrete changes the nature of the rock underneath. Drive through one of those central Florida subdivisions today, and it looks like the picture of the American dream: the new homes, the green lawns, the kids on bikes, the swimming pools glinting in the sun, and it is almost impossible to believe that anything could be wrong with ground so ordinary and so calm. But the geologists have looked beneath it, and they have seen the honeycomb, the voids growing in the dark, the cover thinning, the sand trickling down into the holes below. They have seen what took a man from his own bed one quiet night and never gave him back. The limestone keeps dissolving. The water keeps getting pumped. The population keeps growing, right on top of the most treacherous ground in the state. And the one thing that would make it all safe, solid rock beneath the homes is the one thing that does not exist and cannot be made. Because Florida was built on a sponge that has been slowly dissolving for millions of years and is dissolving still. The houses look permanent. The neighborhoods look settled, but underneath the lawns and the driveways, the ground is hollow and getting hollower, and there is no engineering, no money, and no amount of wishing that can put back the rock the water has already taken away. The geologists found what is down there. They just cannot do anything about it, and neither can anyone else, which is why the only real question left is not whether the ground will keep opening, but where and when and who happens to be standing on it when it does.